death even.
Oh no,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah, so I'm glad you guys weren't able to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, I guess Bruce is bolder. Okay, hey, Ed is on.
Woo!
Hey, excellent. So before I hand things to Ed, I wanted to kick off with a couple comments here. First, thanks everyone, for being here, being part of the club, for your patience as we sort things out. A lot of changes this year with COVID and with stuff around the club, and we're going to do our very best to make things work for you. So far, the shape of the course that we have for last year / this year is 2 lectures. Ed's going to deliver one tonight on trip planning. Matt Palavinskas is going to deliver one on May 4th about travel techniques. And then I'm going to work on getting people divided up into pods and attached to leaders. And the field portion of the course will be a fitness check. Make sure that everybody's able to get up side with the usual amount of weight and the usual amount of time. A C&Z pulley review and potentially instructional session as ground school prior to getting out in the field, and then a field trip, which may or may not include a climb, but we'll cover placing pickets, building snow anchors, traveling roped up, and a night spent sleeping in the snow, which is always really fun. So again, thank you. Appreciate your patience while we work through this. And without further ado, I will hand off to Ed. Who, in Glacier travel style, appears to be frozen. I'm not sure what's going on here. Well, hey, so while we wait for Ed to thaw out, any questions about what I mentioned just a minute ago?
I had a question about timing. So in particular, North Cascades permits are being issued on May 15th, which is a couple weeks out. And I know my friends and I have a lot of requests in. So I just wanted to see kind of like, you guys have a date when some of the field trip dates will be fleshed out?
So we've got some trips that are set already, and I will get those posted. The big thing I need to do is to separate folks into package and non-package people, and then plus the leaders are still getting the trips posted, so we've got the right structure, I think, at this point, and we're going to get them on the website. So hold tight. And I'm expecting that we'll have some trips all the way into June or July. I may even post some later. For some purposes for the course, it's actually nice to get out later season when there are more exposed crevasses, places like on the Whitman, on Mount Rainier, or on the Inspiration, on El Dorado. You can demonstrate and practice more of the skills in the course in later season. So yeah, hold tight, and the hope is that we can work around everybody's schedule. Any other questions? Oh, okay, I see Ed's back. Maybe?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, for whatever reason, Zoom just decided to drop me.
Okay. Well, hopefully that doesn't happen again.
Yeah. All right, so you want me to start sharing screen, Paul?
Yeah. You should be able to do it, and if it's there, you go.
All right, how does that work for everybody? All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about trip planning. in general, in the context of just setting up the trip, if you will. And then as we start rolling into the rest of the class, we'll kind of work through the more technical skills that will kind of help inform, what we're going to cover tonight. But this is really, much of the background that you as leaders will probably start to experience, and whether it's with the Mountaineers or with your own private trips. So in some sense, you're going to be on the sharp end, and you're going to be assisting the climb leader, and eventually be future climb leaders, and as well as going out with your friends. So really trying to set up the planning of how to kind of put that all together. And for for some people who are more planning centric, this might be pretty intuitive, but for some people, it might be a new set of considerations. As you think about your trips, it's a little bit more involved in some respects than maybe just going out on a hike, but but it's something that hopefully everybody will eventually feel comfortable doing. So, and by being on the sharp end and taking the lead, I mean, you really do come up with a different set of responsibilities than what you might have been accustomed to on prior trips, whether it's with Mountaineers or with your friends. And it is a different skill set, but it's also a different way of thinking, different mindset. And in many ways, you're responsible for the entire team, not only those that are on your immediate rope team, but also if you're part of the larger assistance, with the trip leader, or you are the trip leader, then you are the person to kind of help organize this and bring it all together. And in many ways, it's a little bit more challenging, but it's also more rewarding. And I think for me, a lot of the trip planning aspects really kind of gets you into that mode of thinking about the climb ahead of time and what to expect, to help not only work through what's going to be on the climb, but also to kind of help other people as along the way. So ultimate goal of any climb, we want to go from reading guidebooks and, really trip planning to, being, in the pizza bar or wherever, enjoying the after climb meal, if you will, but we obviously want to summit. And these are these are a set of skills that are going to, hopefully get you there. And it's really by proper planning that's, the vehicle to get you there. So what we're going to talk about today, is really the importance of doing proper trip planning. We want to review the considerations, All right, sorry, Zoom keeps dropping me for whatever reason. So we'll be going through the considerations necessary for the planning process, but also kind of learn, what information goes into that plan.
Here, you'll need to reshare, Ed.
Oh, fuck. Sorry, did I say that?
Entirely appropriate.
Well, the frustrating thing is I've been on conference calls since 7:30, so this has been far less, this should not be an issue. All right, so let's talk about what the trip plan actually is. And it's really, a document that we're looking to plan, we're executing, and we're reflecting upon, what it is that, we want to do. In this case, it's a climb. But it's also a way to manage risk. It's either, maybe it's an area that you're going into for the first time, maybe it's not, but we want to plan what to expect when we're not being forced with making other decisions. So the clear head, being at home, is really the goal. And we want to think about this as being complete, concise, practical, but it's also like a living document, if you will. And when I say living document, it's gonna transform over the week that you are planning and preparing for the climb, but then it's also evaluating as you are on the climb itself. So if we think about this planning life cycle, if you will, there's this pre-trip research. This is kind of what we're going to talk about up front, maybe. And then there's obviously the trip execution where you're going out on the trip. And then, there's also sort of like a post-evaluation. And, here we're just collecting information. When we're out on the trip, we want to be able to kind of use that information to make informed decisions. And then obviously afterwards, we want to reflect that, but we also want to communicate that to others, as in the form potentially of trip reports, so that those going on whatever outing might have the benefit of some of our experience as well. And we benefit from theirs as well. So what goes into it? We're going to think about this in a couple of different buckets. There's the objective, how we select what we're going to do. It's going to be evaluating and there's the plan itself, which is what we are doing. It's also setting up an emergency plan and a contingency that should something go slightly awry. And then also what type of observations should we be doing out in the field. So if we think about just the plan objectives, it's you just ask the questions like, what do you want to climb? I mean, it could be anything from I'm really interested in this peak because I drive by I-5 and I see Mount Rainier all the time, or it could be you're working on maybe the Bulger list, or or you have a very strong interest in a certain part of the state like the North Cascades. So really the selection of the climb really involves your interest as well as the interest within your group. And then also looking at that peak, and there's many different ways you could get up, some more challenging or tougher than others. So think about that relative to your skill set, and or maybe there's destination along the way that you want to consider. In this, this is just a map going up to Camp Muir, but the idea is that you're going to choose a route up to a certain destination, but you also want to keep in mind and build in contingencies, that being an alternate route, more to assess danger points that might be along the way, or potential hazards like should weather come in, or if maybe you're like in a no-fall zone or something like that. Something that gives you options should your plan not go exactly according to all the forecasts. And there's tons of resources out there, for selecting trips. I mean, there's guidebooks, there's Summit Post, Mountain Project, Cascade Climbers, Mountaineers website. I mean, there's no shortage of places to source that. I didn't include like Facebook groups, but there's, it's really just choose something that's interesting to you. And the Mountaineers actually have a pretty good resource, for introductory glacier climbs, and and thereon and harder, once you start being confident in your skill sets. So I'm just going to switch over to that weather forecasts, if you will. So this is really kind of collecting information about where you're going and what to expect. I mean, in some ways it's kind of empiric. I mean, we take it for granted, just, 'cause Seattle's sunny all the time. But when you're out in the mountains, the weather, bad inclement weather comes in, there's potential risk and it could create complications. So you want to collect information from multiple sources, and you want to see what the commonalities are, and you want to be able to kind of develop an informed decision. There's many different weather models once you start diving into this, and each source might be different. So a forecast across multiple models, might provide you some sense of surety compared to other models that might be, or other sites that might give conflicting information. It kind of, just gives you pause before, making a go, no go decision. But most importantly, what you want to do is, of all the sites, you want to capture the specifics, and whether it's the trends, accumulation, if there's precip. And these are the really important part. Like, you just don't want to look on your phone, for like the little sun symbol. You really want to dive into, Is there snow coming in? How long was it snowing before, where you're going? What's the, anticipated accumulation? Are there going to be winds? What direction is it coming from? What aspect is the climb on? Are you going to be feeling it? So you want to think about like all of those, all that is information, and you want to kind of pull that forward so that you could help make an informed decision on how you may or may not be affected. I mean, just because the weather forecast may not be favorable for some routes, you might be able to have a little bit more tolerance, for going out in less than ideal weather. For example, you would not go up Mount Rainier in an entire whiteout, but you might want to consider something in the Tatoosh, that might be a little bit lower and, have a different wind pattern or something like that. So these things that not only affect the destination that you're choosing, but also what you could expect while you're out there. And then most importantly, you want to start observing the forecasts several days before the start of your trip. And if you follow the National Weather Service, you know that their updates are at 4 a.m. and 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So you can start really checking in and start to get a sense, is the forecast changing? Is it not? And again, it's all information to help you plan whether to even go. So, if you see sun at the end of your week, and it's like, hey, we got a great climbing weekend, let's go for it. Again, I'm thinking Mount Rainier. But if there's a whole bunch of precip and there's a lot of accumulation, it may or may not be a good idea. But you need to take that into account in your planning process. And I'll have all these slides available for everybody, so you could, at least utilize the links. And many of you probably already use some of these. Personally, the NOAA site and the Windy site, I find very very useful. There's, especially with Windy, there's a lot of different layers that you could help to gather information. And then there's also specialty forecasts, such as like the Mount Rainier and recreational forecast, which is put out by the National Weather Service. And there's others, if you were to go to Denali or Shasta, things like that. Other forecasts you want to consider are avalanche conditions. And earlier in the season, if you're going to be doing a glacier climb March, April, May into June, you want to pay attention to when the forecasts are actually being issued. I mean, at some point they do stop, or they're only issued on weekends. But using your ARI training, pay attention to if there's special notices. But you want to follow if you're not already following the snowpack, and it's pretty hard for most of us to do. So we rely on the national NWAC to kind of help us along, with what that avalanche problem is, what can we expect in the snowpack, and then you could use that to match up to your chosen destination and the route that you have chosen. Sometimes you may be able to retain the same destination, but you may have to go a different route depending upon, obviously, weather or the avalanche conditions. And the main thing I just want to, remind everybody is that, there's really 3 ingredients to making avalanches. It's either the snowpack is unstable for, whatever reason. There's avalanche terrain, and then there's the trigger. So you and your group potentially are the trigger. You could learn about the unstable snowpack ahead of time, but it's really the thing that you can control the most is whether you're in avalanche terrain at all. And knowing your route, knowing your destination helps mitigate that risk. And when you're planning, think about the different parts of the avalanche path. Obviously the forecast is going to speak to the danger in 3 different levels. Either you're below tree line, at tree line, or above tree line, but also in your route selection, in controlling terrain. So there's really 2 things to keep in mind here. just a very looking at the hazard and whether it's, high, considerable, moderate, or low. I mean, all of those things come into play with, making a go or no-go decision or changing your destination. And then I'm assuming everybody's familiar with, just the problems and just being able to kind of read the avalanche rows. I'm not necessarily going to review that, but just rely on that with all your ARI training that, that you have access and understand this information. And if you are climbing outside of the Northwest, you could go to avalanche.org and there's links to other avalanche forecasting sites if you're going to Colorado or Alaska or whatever. And then there's also, if you're climbing up in BC, avalanche.ca. So we've decided on the destination. We're looking at the weather, we're looking at the avalanche forecast, and so now we're going to start to put things together. We want to think about the route itself for the next couple of discussion points, and it's really thinking about your travel as a series of legs and milestones. You have a starting point, and then planning how you're taking bearings and plotting that out on your map or computer ahead of time, noting the elevation changes, estimating travel times. All of that could be done at home, and that's what this effort is really trying to help you with today. So if you think about, the red line, just for argument's sake, this is going to be our leisurely hike up Paradise Glacier. And we know that, okay, below Anvil Rock, we're going to be on some, below some steep slopes, perhaps maybe it's this time of year. And, we know we're going to need to make an observation, and noting that on your travel plan that, hey, at this point, we need to do something or make an assessment as part of this planning process ahead of time. And then by extension, if you did need to make a change in plans, it's not necessarily just turn around and go home. There's always a way out, or there should be. And, planning for that ahead of time just allows things to move through more continuously and, without going out to the field just to turn around because of your one single destination being blocked. For myself personally, I think for any given weekend, I have 3 plans going on 3 different destinations in 3 different parts of the state, just depending upon what the weather. Obviously, during the summer, I tailor that down to maybe just 1. But, in inclement weather, in the shoulder seasons where the weather up north, is in transition, but maybe down south, it might be a little bit better. You might have multiple plans going to at least give yourself some options so that you're not just, sitting at home because your one destination didn't work out. In terms of just providing an example of the type of information that I've been speaking of in terms of these legs and milestones, you want to, we plotted out on the map, in terms of, different positions and the bearings. And it's really kind of filling this out. And, you have a starting point, and I mean, everybody has taken navigation and understands that the UTM grid is pretty ideal for what we do. But then also having, using the map to take our bearings, and it's really sort of a roadmap, if you will. Also noting, so not only you have the bearings and the locations, but you're also looking at your elevation, your distance, your elevation gain, and we're also looking at the amount of time, and most importantly, we're looking at the amount of time it's going to take you to do that leg. So then you may ask yourself, like, okay, I know how all to do that. You know, navigation kind of helped me along. I could read the map, I could plot all of that out, but how do you figure this out? And like, how do I know when I'm on a glacier, like how fast or slow I'm going to go? And the short answer is well, there's no perfect way. And I'm going to show you some tools, but I wouldn't get too carried away with being precise, because you know, every trip is different, every group is different. You know, sometimes you have a group that's feeling really good, so you may travel a little bit faster, or everybody's a little earlier in the season, you might be going a little slower because maybe people aren't at their full fitness yet. But at the end of end of July, if you're still on a glacier and people have been getting out, I mean, you could be moving pretty well. So all of those things start to affect the travel time. But the basic factors you want to consider when you're looking at the planning is obviously the horizontal distance, the overall mileage, the elevation change, whether the terrain is going to be easy uphill, are you on snow, are you on scrambling, whatever that might be, factoring in some time for breaks, and then how you move at altitude is also different than how you would be moving, say, on Mount Si, for example. You're just going to move slower once you get above 8,000 feet elevation, and it only will get a little bit slower as you get higher. And then also, like, how much weight are you carrying? Is this a day climb? Maybe for 16 hours or less, hopefully. Or are you doing like a full-on Denali expedition where you have multiple days, or is it like an overnight? How much weight you carry on your backs, really does kind of affect. So just a quick little reminder, because I'm going to be referring to a method, and it does have a direct relationship to the UTM grids. So just as a quick refresh, those yellow lines on our maps, they're in 1 kilometer plots, and they essentially form a grid over the course of the Earth that we could plot our location. And the numbers on the top, or side, and the side and the bottom, put ourselves in relationship. Being in the northern hemisphere, we are in a northern zone, and we're in an easting zone because we're a little bit way west of Greenwich, England. And then within each one of those grids, there's truncated coordinates that just allow a more finer level of precision. So we're really going to be using this UTM for this method that I'm about to share with you. And then there's also just a quick reminder that you could orient your map and compass at home. You plot yourself on the map. You want to go to the top of Mount Baker. You line your compass up to the UTM grids. You line up your compass to those, and then you read the heading, which then allows you to kind of get your bearing for your trip planning. And just a quick reminder, because every couple of years this always kind of surprises me personally, but we all know that the Earth's core is moving the magnetic north, and as of today, declination is down 15 degrees 29 minutes. So as you start climbing, if last time you did your navigation course and you set your declination and your compass 5 years ago, it's probably changed a little bit. So keeping that somewhat up to date is always a good thing, and that obviously affects your trip planning because it might throw your bearings off. So here's the method that I've been kind of working into. So this is really about how do you figure out how much time, like if I'm going up a hill and I know I have elevation gain, you could learn through experience, but this is also sort of like a nice quick way to provide you with a base point of reference. So if we're calculating a leg of our travel and we consider 1 unit, which is 1 square in the UTM grid, as a unit, this is a method that sums up a number of different aspects, and you divide by a factor in order to come up with what that would be in hours. This is all in metric. So it does require a little bit of conversion if you're working in all imperial, but with most digital maps, you could probably set to metrics pretty way. So in essence, you're adding up a number of units at, in elevation, horizontal distance, and then you're dividing by your mode of travel. So if we're climbing and we are going uphill, we would divide by the factor of 4. If we're going downhill by foot, we would divide by a factor of 6. So here's how it plays out, just as an example. So so this leg that I'm suggesting is like it's 2.8 kilometers long, and it gains 318 meters, which is just around 1,000 feet. So the horizontal distance on the map is 2.8 kilometers. Divide 1, which is we're 1 unit, nice and convenient. We end up with 2.8 units. We then add what the vertical change is. In this case, the vertical, the 1,045 feet, or the 318 meters, we're going to use the 318 meters, divide 100 equals 318. So you add up these 2 units, you get 6 units total. And then you could see the travel time is just simply taking those 2 units, horizontal and vertical change in plane, and then dividing upon your mode of travel. So if you're walking uphill, we take those 6 units, divide 4. That should be about 1.5 hours, of travel uphill to go 2.8 kilometers. If you're going downhill by foot, you take that same units, assuming you're backtracking, you would take those 6 units, you divide by 6, which is the factor from the prior page, and then you should be about an hour. And if you think about it empirically with maybe some of the hikes that you may have been on, obviously it takes longer to go uphill, but this starts giving you some factors of blending in elevation with distance, and you can start to add up the various legs and the sum total, all of those from your starting point to your ultimate destination. You can start to calculate how much time it would take you to get in and out. Other factors for considering, so I'm moving away from that as a method, but I'm also just planting the seed that you should probably consider other time factors, if you will, like when you're on the glacier climb. So for example, when you're on the glacier, and depending upon, again, entirely depends upon the route, if is there rock or ice that's above, and it's early morning, sometimes when the sun hits it, like the Adams Glacier on the north side of Mount Adams is a perfect example. At 6 a.m., the seracs up high are getting the full sun and the ice and rock starts to fall. So from a planning perspective, you want to be past those rocks and seracs by 6 a.m. before they heat up so that you're not being rained down. So just as a quick little example of how you might utilize that information. And part of that you extract from guidebooks, trip reports, information like that helps you with your planning process. Also think about the speed differences between being roped and versus unroped travel. When you're on the glacier and you're all roped up together, you're just going to move a little bit slower. And While the method that I showed you earlier is sort of an overall slushy type of a way of thinking about it, you would make up for the faster travel of being unroped as, think about it like on the approach to that glacier. Timing considerations, you want to fold in some camping locations or bivvy sites, and I throw that under the timing part because if you're going to be doing a really long 16-hour one day push to El Dorado and back, you know, at some point you may want to make a call. If you're just running late, you know, where could you stay, you know, if you had to stay out overnight, and that kind of factors into this turnaround time. So it's established. So by doing the analysis and the work to determine how long it's going to take you to get in and how long to take out, you know, you could quickly see whether a one-day push is going to be feasible at a certain point in year. I'll go back to this El Dorado example as a second. To do an El Dorado as a one day in the middle of winter, even though maybe it was the nice spring, you know, February we had, the amount of daylight is just far less than what you would have in the middle of summer. So your turnaround time in the winter might be a little sooner than in the summer. In the summer, you might be able to push your turnaround time a little later because the sun will be up a little bit longer. And that affects whether or not, or how you think about where your bivvy sites would be, and whether, at what point do you actually make a call to stop and not go any further. Staying on the trip plan for a moment and maybe moving away more towards logistics, you know, in your planning process, start thinking about your personal and technical gear, as well as, you know, the personal and technical gear for the rest of the group. And I'm sure we've all been on climbs, you know, and on some of our basic levels, you know, there's just the number of ropes, the size and diameter of ropes, whether you're bringing avalanche gear, who's bringing the first aid kit, water filter, stove, all of those things kind of factor in. And you could, by doing the planning, and communicating that to your team, what you're essentially heading off is everybody bringing in a water filter, but no one brought the first aid kit, or everybody brought a rope, but nobody brought a stove. So think about the logistics for the number of people, how many people are in the group, what seems reasonable, what could be shared, what can't be shared, and really planning that out ahead of time. Also, thinking logistically is also the available food and water resources on any particular climb. Sometimes water will be fairly abundant, you know, which means that you might be able to carry less water, which means you go faster, which might affect your timing. Or if you're going to be doing like an all-day trip, you know, just being prepared with maybe a little extra food. And then most importantly, you know, when you're planning your trip, just where and when is your group going to meet? I know right now in COVID, you know, most of us are just driving individually to trailheads, but when we do hopefully get to the point where we're able to carpool again, you know, just having a meetup time, when's the group going to be going over? Are we all going to go at once? Where are we meeting? Are we meeting at the trailhead? Are we meeting at a park and ride? You know, are we all going to follow each other, or we cannot? You know, just being clear. It's, you know, just communicating with those that you're going to be out with. As far as, you know, there's just a lot of other digital travel planning resources out there. CalTopo and Gaia are really good with not only the physical maps of the routes and in terms of that data, but both of them have very interesting layers. I know CalTopo has layers for recent forest fire burns, which is super helpful if you're going into an area that may have been affected by any of the forest fires over the past couple of years. Gaia has like a new layer where they're doing slope shading relative to the avalanche slope angles, which is also really handy to have. And you could download those to your phone, work off of that, or obviously print that and carry it. Another resource is that I just, maybe most people are using it is just, utilize your national forest or national park websites, particularly for road or trail conditions. A little anecdote is, some friends and I were all excited about going to climb Adams Glacier, and we were going to do it in April, and then just didn't feel right, because if you think about like the north side of Adams, like that whole national forest is just shut down because of all the snow. And taking a look at the national forest road conditions and just when is the road going to open, and or when's the trail, is the trail snow covered or not, like all of those little bits start to inform part of your planning process, particularly if you're on the shoulder seasons. Or if you're in the middle of summer, they probably will say whether a trail is closed because maybe of a fire or something. All right. Another part of trip planning is really developing an emergency contingency plan. And here this is really just setting yourself and your group up, so that should you be overdue, that somebody is going to be able to call for a response if you are overdue and you haven't been able to get in contact. So the first question when you start thinking about your emergency plan is like, what communication is available? The POBs, have been around for a bunch of years. The InReach seems to be gaining like a lot of popularity. Some phone services, you could get a cell coverage out in certain parts of the mountains. Sometimes you can't. So just thinking about some of those opportunities of when you could actually get communication. For me personally, like I generally, while I have come to learn areas that I can get calls out, I'll generally factor in at least communicating with my at-home contact more when I'm on the road, and I could at least let them know when I would expect to get that call, because I would be more assured of a phone call out at a certain point in time. But it's also about like calling for a rescue should you need that. As you kind of assemble your team, who has what medical training, and you want to designate somebody as the either the team medic or the second person as team medic. Not suggesting that all the doctors and nurses become the designated medics, but you want to be able to kind of share resources and and take a survey of who has the most current medical knowledge or training, with WUFA or MOFA. We were talking about escape routes. Those they're just simply alternative routes, not only up but also down. Sometimes you may find yourself on a ridge, and if there's a fast way to get off of the ridge without backtracking, you kind of want to plot that and keep that in your knowledge base. And think about like how you're going to travel. I mean, obviously safety is in numbers, but you don't want to go out with too few people, but fewer people does include increased speed, but it also decreases the overall safety of the group. Also related to just the emergency plan is know where you're climbing. Know where the nearest ranger station is, know what county or counties that you are traveling through. Note that your destination might be in one county, but you travel through another. If you go up to Skyline Lake, you dance between Chilean and King counties. Know where the nearest hospital is, and also know who receives the emergency call from your group as well as your at-home contact. should an emergency be needed. For example, if you're in the national park, you want to call the National Park Service. If you are out in the national forests or anywhere else, you want to call the sheriff directly of the county that you are in. You can call 911, but be aware that calling the sheriffs directly, they are more trained and knowledgeable when you explain that you are in the mountains and you're climbing. They will be a faster conduit to search and rescue than a 911 operator who most likely is more familiar with working with the general population and may not have the experience or insight that a search and rescue team in the mountains is needed. And then obviously if you're on a mountaineer's climb, they have an emergency number that would be called, and they will provide assistance for both with working with the officials who are doing the rescue, as well as those at home, at your emergency contacts that you list out in your profiles. And establish an at-home contact, if you will. And this is one person who is in charge of calling for any assistance, particularly like if you end up being overdue. And you want to leave with them a copy of the travel plan. You want to leave a copy of who's on the climb, who their emergency contacts are, when you're going to start, finish, what trailheads you're at. You want to tell them specifically, call, like if you're going to be due back in town, let's say 8 p.m. on Sunday, give yourself a little buffer should something happen. Ask your contact to call for an emergency response if you're not in at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. Give yourself a little buffer if you have to stay out, so that if you're still safe, you get out, make the call, and that's way they don't have to call out the authorities. And you want to communicate to them who to call. We were just talking about whether you call the National Park Service, the sheriffs, the mountaineers. If it's a mountaineers climb, call the mountaineers, and the mountaineers would basically handle everything. You want to keep a gear list of everything that the group is carrying, and if you're carpooling or if you're driving separately, the make, models, colors of the vehicles at the trailheads, preferably with license plate, but not necessarily required. I mean, you could start to see that a lot of your trip plan is really just being left, with your at-home contact. A little anecdote about this is that if you're going to be climbing, let's say you're climbing outside the group, you're doing a personal climb with a group of your friends, and if you, by not designating one person who's going to initiate this, people our loved ones and friends have different perceptions of what overdue is. And unless you are being very clear with them with what we do and what to expect relative to the destination, it has happened where maybe someone's significant other has called out for a rescue because Johnny wasn't home for dinner that night, when the plan was that the call was going to be made the next morning, and everybody could be fine, but you want to manage the people that we know and love at home as well. So please take this to heart as you do your own climbs. So we went through just a lot of preparation and organization. So you've communicated that to your group, emails have gone around, everybody's kind of driven out to the trailhead, everybody's all excited. It's time to go on the climb. The plan, really what you're doing now is you're executing the plan. And the suggestion would be is to re-present the plan at the trailhead. ideally you should have shared your planning either with the group ahead of time so everybody knows what to expect. You want everybody to be on the same page and just make sure that similar to ARI, where you want to build consensus that this is what the plan is, and you have options that you've built into your plan. Should something go wrong, you could talk about the weather, you could talk about the various forecasts, what's changed, do you still go? All of those good things that you learned in ARI can and should be applied to what you do on our glacier climbs and out in just summer climbing in general. We've talked about setting a hard turnaround time. Again, just have a conversation with everybody like, okay, we expect to be on the summit by noon. Our hard turnaround is going to be 2 p.m. so we get back to the cars at before dark. Be very clear about that and follow that as to the best you can. And then monitor the progress as you go. Obviously you're following the route that you did, but if things are different, you want to pay attention to those things. And this is just a quick little chart that you could start to think about. So if with any one of these topics, so if you from timing, if everybody met late but you still will meet your emergency turnaround time, excuse me, it's not bad, but it's a factor that could influence your overall plan. And if that's the only thing, then that's probably fine. But you can start to see that if you start having a number of yellow or red items start happening, people didn't bring their gear. Everybody is maybe going up the first couple miles, everybody's far more exhausted than usual. Like you can start to see that if as you're going along, if various aspects are trending more to that yellow red zone, then you may want to consider that the plan may not be adequate for that day, that time, that group under those conditions. It's not to say that your plan's bad. It's just it all just depends. And all you could do with your plan is just to make sure, to monitor it, and that, if because how long it could take you to do things, either up, down, and what's involved, what the milestones, what the trigger points are along the way. And it's really just paying attention that, are you going to be exposing yourself to unnecessary risk along the way? And this is just a good little way to help you mitigate to make some decisions. After the trip, highly encourage people just to kind of reflect on how your planning went, and think about this just honestly, like were the forecasts spot on? Did you read the forecast correctly? Did you have multiple conflicting forecasts? Which one prevailed? Did you have too many legs in your travel path? Were you constantly looking at your map when maybe a more simplified amount of legs could have helped sped things up? Did you miss waypoints along the way? Were there milestones that you came across that weren't even considered? Think about those things, because it not only helps you as a personal debrief, so that you know how to plan for the next trip, because you want to learn by maybe what didn't necessarily go right, but you want to. I would suggest, it's a learning experience, but you also want to share that information as well. So just as much as in the beginning of the evening, I was talking about like referring to some trip reports, on Summit Post or Cascade Climbers. Consider putting a trip report up yourself. And the why is that, well, if everybody shares maybe what the trip on the route that they've done, it not only helps others, but just as much as it helped you, but it also could help update beta. You know, if you think about like the Becky guide, I mean, it was what, written like 25 years ago or published 25 years ago. So not all the data in there is necessarily accurate because, you know, some of the glaciers have receded. Maybe forest fires have, you know, modified the trails, you know. And this is a way to kind of communicate changes to more static information that you would be referring to. And you want to do this as soon as you get back, you know, just while the details are fresh, and, you know, and try to keep it a little bit more factual, though you know, I mean, think everybody loves a good humorous story, but, you know, think about like, what would you be interested in, you know, if you were planning a trip, you know, was there anything with the road conditions, trail conditions, you know, was there any safety concerns, you know, consider putting a GPS track up or not, you know, just thinking about, you know, information that would be helpful to others. So for the next lecture, I want everybody to plan a trip. And the trip we're going to do is, I'd like to at least have everybody assemble a travel plan. We're going to go up the Mount Baker, and we're going to climb the Coleman-Deming route. And doesn't matter, you know, let's just say it's going to be spring, but I'd like you to use these forecasts. So the first forecast, their weather forecast, is going to be, again, this will go out after the lecture, but, you know, the first plan, if you will, you know, it's going to be a bluebird day. There's no precip, you know, it just looks really great. But you know what? There was a big snowfall that had happened the, you know, a couple days prior, and, you know, NWAC had put out a considerable avalanche forecast for wind slabs on northwest and northeast slopes above tree line. So the question is, does that affect your route? If so, is there a contingency, and how does that affect your planning? The other forecast I want you to consider is also that, you know, the forecast for the climb is going to be cloudy. You know, there's going to be some snow, maybe 3 to 6 inches throughout. But in terms of the avalanche, it's moderate forecast. You know, we know that there's some storm slab, you know, from some snow the day before, but it's all elevations. So, you know, you have, you know, a decision, you know, you have two different decision-making aspects. Obviously, one's AVI related, the other is weather related. So that's everything that I have for you tonight. I'm happy to take any questions if people have any. Paul, I'm going to assume that you're going to moderate that.
Yeah, happy to. And I think everybody should be able to unmute themselves.
Hi, just a clarifying question on the homework.
Mm-hmm.
Were those forecasts for the same day, just like two different sources, or are they for like 2 different days?
Let's say it's the same weekend, but magically you're going to plan for 2 different scenarios.
Okay.
So.
Cool.
Regarding weather, I'd just be interested in kind of any tips you have. When I'm on a trail, for example, when I listen to NOAA, the Puget Sound is generally pretty good, but it's offset by a couple degrees. But like Eastern Washington slopes are totally off. And sometimes my Garmin InReach weather is totally off. So I didn't know if you had any tips for checking weather when there is no cell service and you're on route.
Ooh. So the way I've gotten around it in the past is I have been able to slip out a phone call every once in a while and call my at-home contact, and I've actually left them with pinpoints on the National Weather Service. So I've actually called for, you know, when I checked in, they knew to go to the website and just read off, you know, what the what the forecast would be, and then I could actually, upon hearing it, I've actually been able to, you know, either validate, and I've done that on, like on 4-day climbs in particular. The InReach, you know, does allow texting, which is kind of nice. I have been able to get some texts out, but it's kind of spotty. I don't know what your carrier is, but Verizon seems to be pretty good. Not always the best, but in terms of other weather, I haven't had any success with weather radios, just because it's more lowland and marine based. And internet service has been pretty hard. Some of the guides that I've been out with carry a sat phone, but that's pretty expensive way to get weather.
That's a cool trick to have a pin and have like that query string program. That's cool. I like that.
And I was actually just going to bring that up, and everybody's familiar with, or I should ask, is everybody familiar with the National Weather Service? So like, so for right here on the desktop service, you could drop a pin exactly, you know, where you want to be, and when you do it out in the mountains, it actually interpolates what the weather is. So it's not as if they're doing a forecast for that, but they're really pulling it off of, they divide up the Cascades in 3 zones. And I don't have that bookmark available right now, but you could drop a pin, you could send the link to your person, and usually and I don't know if people know about this, but there's 2 parts I would check regularly. You know, one is the hourly forecast. So for that point in time, you could start to tell, like, you know, right now there's no rain in the forecast. This is a pin that's on Seattle. Actually, you know what? I should do something out in the mountains. Let's see what's happening on Mount Rainier. All right, and you could get in pretty good. So it's like, okay, let's Camp Muir right there. So you could have your person read off the hourly forecast. You know, it looks like there's no rain or snow precip, because those would be bars that would show up in this column. You know, and they could give you, you know, okay, temperatures are, you know, 30s to 20s. You know, again, it's just quick beta that you could ask for that specifically if you know what's coming in or you're concerned about anything. The other item for this website that I would highly encourage is also read the forecast discussion. And this is a great introduction to learning about Pacific Northwest weather and patterns and just like how things come through. So essentially the forecasters will write up the forecast, issue it, and then they're going to write about, we saw such and such in our models, or we saw that the European model didn't line up with this model, the US model, so we have low confidence on this, even though they put out the forecast to be, you know, sunny, you know, and they'll explain why, and they'll, you know, there's a unsettled weather coming in, or there's a convergence zone being set up. If you're out in the mountains, you definitely want to know something about that, particularly if you're around Snoqualmie Pass, Stevens Pass, or even up off of Route 20. But this is a great way to get some background on at least what the forecasters are seeing. I'm a big fan of Windy, and you know, you could, so we'll kind of just go to Mount Rainier. It doesn't allow you to zoom in very well, but if you could drop a pin, and then here, you know, you could have, so the background is right now it's set for wind, but you could set it for precip amounts, and you could actually use this slide bar to actually see if there's any precip that's going to be coming in. So I mean, actually, Camp Muir looks pretty good over. You can see like, okay, so it looks like up to Friday 8 a.m. Looks like the precip's going to be pretty good, and then around 10 something comes through. And so this is super handy. And I've actually, there's a cloud layer on Windy as well. And I've actually switched climbs or switched destinations because I was watching Windy and the clouds coming in on the west side of the Cascades. I just simply moved my destination to the to the east side to avoid all of that. So you could get pretty savvy with some of these tools.
And I think all this should play into your sense of safety. What are a few clouds to hike through? Well, if you're not able to see overhead hazards or kind of assess your surroundings to choose your route, then that's something that would lead you to reconsider your destination. And I don't know how to get there super easily, but Windy will also let you compare at least 4 different forecasts. So you can kind of pull it up, and if you don't really feel like you want to trust one, you can look at 4 and see if 3 are voting in favor of going out, or all 4 say it's going to be a quarter stay.
Yeah, the ECMFWF, that's the American model, but the NAM. I mean, each one of these models have different time frames. Like the American model is better suited for like longer term. But if you go to NAM, it's almost like a little bit more precise. So as you get closer to climb day, you may want to start flipping between the models. And a good example of this, and I don't know if this is going to show up really well, but let's say, we're looking, tomorrow at 5 a.m., what's going to be happening? You could see that no precip on the US model. We'll go to NAM. I mean, you can start to see that this is I think it's European based, and it's just a finer tune model, but it's only short term. It's like maybe 36 hours ahead at any given time. But you could see where the US model never picked up this precip. This model is suggesting, south of Mount Rainier, I mean, should be okay, but you can start to see like there's a little bit of light precip more in that Mowich Lake area and sort of points on the west, but the area is still generally clear. Again, it just takes playing around with this, but these are some very quick go-tos for me in order to kind of help make some decisions. Another good book on weather is I could send a link around. There's a weather called I want to say like Weather Patterns of the Pacific Northwest. I could look it up real quick, but it's really good for explaining like why we have the Pineapple Express and why in winter we get the air from Alaska. It's just, again, it's just understanding, and I'm not a weather nerd by any means, but just it helps me understand to make informed choices for destinations if I could understand and read what's coming through.
Yeah, I think you might be right, Ryan. Okay, any other questions from folks? No, we covered a lot of stuff here. I think it doesn't go without saying, but I think it's worth repeating what Ed said at the top of the lecture about the expectation is that really any rope lead, anybody who's got lead in their role in the climb, shows up ready to fully participate as a leader. Unlike when you're basic and you assume your climb leader is all knowing, you should show up ready to check and debate and contribute. And that's a great ingredient in having a successful, enjoyable, and safe climb. That's why we're covering all this stuff as part of this module.
This is the book that I had just mentioned. It's from Cliff Mass, and hopefully you put his politics aside if needed, but it's a very well written book, and it really explains it in layman's terms. Just what our weather is doing and why it does it. It's a good, fairly quick read.
Cool. Well, no, we don't need to stand between you and your beer or your Netflix or what have you. Happy to take more questions. We'll send out the recording, we'll send out slides, and then we'll look forward to seeing everybody 7 days from now, May 4th, for Matt's talk. And in the meantime, you take those parameters that Ed offered and think about how you'd orchestrate those 2 trips up and down the Coleman Deming based on that information. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Cool.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.
Great presentation.
Night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, guys. It was awesome.
Hey, Paul. Oh,
Yeah.
you're out. Oh, you're on.
Let me. I'll stop the recording here.